I never thought a smile could change everything. But when my friend's mom leaned closer and whispered, "Promise me, you'll tell no one," I knew nothing between us would ever feel the same again. I hadn't planned on staying long. My friend had asked me to stop by, and I thought it would be just another casual evening, the kind you forget about the moment it's over. But the second I stepped through the door, I realized this visit would be different. She was there, waiting in the hallway, her posture calm, her presence quietly commanding. His mom. I'd seen her before in passing, but never like this, never when her attention was fully on me. She greeted me with a smile that felt warmer than the welcome itself, a smile that didn't just rest on her lips but reached her eyes, softening them in a way that made me pause. Her voice carried that low, even tone of someone who didn't need to raise it to be heard. "It's good to see you again," she said, and as she reached out to shake my hand, the simple contact unsettled me. Her fingers were cool at first, then warming quickly against my skin, delicate yet steady. For a second too long, I held on to that handshake, the quiet steadiness of her grip sparking something in me I couldn't name. I tried to act natural, but my eyes betrayed me. I noticed the way she carried herself, the way her hair framed her face with an effortless grace, strands catching the light from the hallway lamp. She was older, yes, but it wasn't something that distanced her, it drew me in. Everything about her seemed deliberate, measured, like she had nothing to prove and yet left an impression with the simplest gesture. When she led me into the living room, her hand brushed mine as she passed me a glass of water. It was nothing, accidental, surely, but it left a lingering warmth that distracted me more than I wanted to admit. I could still feel that faint contact on my skin as I sat down. I caught myself listening more intently to her than to my own friend. The way she laughed, not loudly but with a richness that made the air around us feel lighter. The subtle fragrance of her perfume, floral with a hint of something deeper, maybe sandalwood, drifted whenever she moved, threading itself into my memory without permission. And then there was her smile again. She turned it on me when I made some small comment, a half-hearted joke that didn't deserve much attention, but she gave it to me anyway. That smile wasn't polite. It was engaged, as if she'd let me in on something, as if she wanted me to feel seen. My chest tightened in a way I didn't understand, the kind of sensation that's equal parts thrilling and unsettling. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into an ordinary kindness. But even then, sitting there with the sound of casual chatter filling the room, I knew that first smile had already done its work. It had shifted something inside me. A door I didn't know existed had quietly opened, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to close. The evening went on in an ordinary rhythm, voices overlapping, plates clinking, my friend talking too quickly about things I only half listened to. Yet my focus kept straying, no matter how much I tried to ground myself in the moment. Every so often, I would catch her looking at me. Not in an obvious way, not in the way someone stares when they want to be caught, but in the soft, steady glance of someone measuring something quietly. And when my eyes found hers, instead of pulling away, she held the look for just a beat too long. It was a strange kind of silence, the kind that grows in the spaces between words. My friend was laughing about something, his voice filling the room, but her attention wasn't on him. It was on me. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, not playful, not teasing, but knowing. A smile that seemed to ask a question without speaking it aloud. When she leaned forward to set a plate down on the table, the faint trace of her perfume drifted between us again. It wasn't overwhelming, but it lingered, delicate and grounding all at once. My senses caught it before my mind had the chance to guard itself. I shifted in my chair, pretending to adjust, but really, I was trying to quiet the thrum in my chest. Our eyes met again. She was close enough now that I could see the tiny lines at the corners of her eyes, not flaws but proof of a life lived, of laughter and years I couldn't yet imagine. They made her even more beautiful, not less. She noticed me noticing, I think, because she tilted her head slightly and gave me that same half-smile, the one that didn't belong to anyone else in the room. I looked away first. I had to. The weight of that gaze was too much, as if it might reveal every thought I wasn't supposed to have. My throat was dry, my words caught, so I lifted the glass she had handed me earlier, trying to steady myself with a sip of water. But even then, I could feel her eyes resting on me, calmly, curiously, like she was waiting for me to meet them again. When I finally did, it was by accident. She had tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her elbow leaning gently against the table, her chin resting lightly on her hand. She looked composed, completely at ease. But the way her gaze didn't flinch, the way it locked into mine with quiet steadiness, made it feel anything but casual. I don't know how long it lasted. A second, maybe two. But in those fleeting moments, I felt something shift again, deeper than before. There was no need for words, no need for gestures. Just a glance, a silent acknowledgement that something unspoken had passed between us. And though the room was loud with conversation, all I could hear was the silence that lived in her eyes, a silence that pulled me in, leaving me both restless and strangely at peace. It wasn't planned, the way the evening shifted. My friend had stepped away for a while, maybe a phone call, maybe something in his room, and suddenly it was just the two of us. The house, which had been buzzing with noise only moments before, felt quieter now, almost like it had taken a breath and was holding it. She was tidying the living room in that effortless way mothers do, stacking plates, straightening cushions, moving with a rhythm that spoke of long habit. I offered to help, more out of restlessness than manners, but she looked at me and smiled. "You don't have to," she said gently, though she didn't stop me when I picked up the plates anyway. It felt different, standing there beside her. No background laughter to blur the edges, no distraction to pull me away. Just her presence, steady, graceful, unhurried, and the subtle awareness that we were alone. She asked me about my studies, my plans, the kind of questions that usually feel routine. But the way she asked, it didn't feel like small talk. Her voice lowered slightly, softer, as if every word was meant to land directly, not just fill the air. She listened intently, her eyes steady on mine, not drifting away the way most people's do. It unnerved me, how seen I felt. When she laughed at something I said, a clumsy attempt to lighten the moment, it wasn't polite laughter. It was quiet and real, the kind that slips out before you think to hold it back. The sound carried warmth, and for a second, I caught myself smiling too much, trying to hold on to it. We sat down afterward, side by side on the couch, the distance between us narrow. It wasn't intentional, but neither of us shifted away. The cushions sank slightly under her weight, tilting me just enough toward her, and suddenly I was aware of every inch between us. She folded her hands in her lap as she listened, fingers entwined loosely, but every now and then, she'd glance at me with an expression that seemed almost guarded, as if she was debating how much of herself to reveal. When she spoke about her own life, it wasn't surface level either. She mentioned her worries, her hopes for her son, and in her voice I caught something else, a trace of loneliness, woven so carefully it could have been missed if I weren't listening closely. At one point, my sleeve brushed against hers as I shifted slightly. A simple accident. But instead of pulling away, I froze. She didn't move either. The contact was small, nothing anyone would notice, but it felt like a pause in time, as though both of us were silently acknowledging it. Her perfume lingered again, faint but close, threading through the moment until I couldn't tell if the quickness in my chest was from her nearness or from the weight of her silence. We weren't doing anything wrong. Just talking. Just sharing space. But the air felt charged, delicate, as if even the smallest word or movement might tip it into something neither of us could take back. The room was dimmer by then, the last stretch of sunlight slipping away through the curtains, leaving a soft amber glow across the walls. My friend still hadn't come back, and the quiet between us deepened into something almost fragile. She was sitting across from me now, one leg tucked beneath her, her posture relaxed but her expression thoughtful, as though something weighed on her mind. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just traced her fingertip along the rim of her glass, circling it slowly, her eyes lowered. I watched, unsure if I should break the silence. Then she looked up, directly into me, her gaze steady and unguarded. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, her voice low, nearly a whisper. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. She hesitated, her lips parting and closing again, as though she was choosing her words with care. Finally, she leaned forward, her elbows resting lightly on her knees, and said something personal, a memory, a confession, a fear she had carried quietly. It wasn't dramatic, not something to shake the world, but the intimacy of it hit me harder than I expected. She didn't have to share it. She chose to. And when she finished, her eyes searched mine for a reaction. There was vulnerability there, barely visible beneath her composure. That same confident woman who carried herself with ease was, in that moment, entrusting me with something delicate. I swallowed, unsure of what to say, but before I could speak, she leaned back slightly, exhaling as though she'd given away more than she meant to. Then came the smile, small, gentle, but charged with something heavier. "Promise me," she said quietly, "you'll tell no one." The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence before them. I don't know why my chest tightened the way it did, why those 4 simple words felt so binding. Maybe it was the way her voice caught slightly on the word promise. Or maybe it was because, deep down, I already knew I would keep her secret, not out of obligation, but out of something far more personal. She reached out then, almost absent-mindedly, and let her hand rest lightly on my wrist. The touch was soft, barely there, but it grounded me in a way nothing else could have. Her fingers lingered, cool at first, then warming against my skin, sending a quiet shiver up my arm. I held her gaze as I nodded. "I promise." Something passed between us then, wordless but undeniable. Her smile deepened, though it wasn't one of triumph. It was softer, almost relieved, like she had let herself trust me with a piece of her she rarely revealed. When she finally let her hand slip away, the warmth stayed. It stayed in my wrist, in my chest, in the unspoken space between us. And I realized that what she had given me wasn't just a secret. It was a thread, tying me to her in a way I hadn't expected, in a way that already felt impossible to undo. I thought the moment might fade, that once my friend returned, everything would slip back into ordinary rhythm, the unspoken thread between us dissolving like it had never been there. But it didn't. If anything, it grew stronger, weaving its way into every small detail, every movement, until even the simplest act seemed charged with meaning. Later in the evening, she asked if I could help her carry a box from the hallway. It wasn't heavy, just awkwardly shaped, and she reached for one end while I took the other. Our fingers brushed as we adjusted our grip, the briefest contact, but it sent that same quiet electricity racing through me. The hallway was narrow, and as we moved, our shoulders touched again and again, small, unplanned brushes that neither of us corrected. Her arm pressed lightly against mine, her presence close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating through her sleeve. The scent of her perfume clung to the air, mixing with the faint smell of dust from the box, and every step felt like a suspension of time. When we set it down, she laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a private one, almost conspiratorial, as though the simple act of carrying something together had been its own little secret. "You're stronger than you look," she teased gently, her eyes sparkling with amusement. I smiled, trying to play it off, but I couldn't ignore the way her fingers reached out instinctively, brushing against my forearm in a light, reassuring touch. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't casual. It was deliberate enough to leave me standing still, aware of every place her fingertips lingered. We found ourselves back in the living room, sitting again, only this time the distance between us seemed to shrink naturally. She leaned slightly toward me as we talked, her arm resting on the back of the couch, close enough that I could feel the faint shift of air whenever she moved. Her gaze lingered, steady and searching. There was a softness in it, but also a depth that unsettled me, as though she was peeling back layers I didn't know I had. My words came slower, my thoughts stumbling, because I could feel that she wasn't just listening, she was seeing me. At one point, her knee brushed mine under the table. A small thing. A nothing thing. But neither of us moved it away. The contact stayed, quiet and unspoken, yet it filled me with a restless calm I couldn't explain. Time blurred. Minutes felt longer, stretched by the silence between sentences, by the closeness we didn't name. Every sound, the creak of the couch, the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall, seemed louder in the quiet that wrapped around us. And though no words were spoken, no promises made, I knew we had crossed into something different. Not with declarations, not with confessions, but with a touch, a glance, a closeness that settled into me like it had always been waiting there. The evening should have ended hours earlier. I knew it, and maybe she did too, but neither of us moved to draw it to a close. My friend was still in another part of the house, caught up with something, leaving us in this strange bubble where time felt suspended. She sat angled toward me now, one arm draped over the back of the couch, her body language open but her eyes carrying something far more complicated. Every so often, I caught her studying me when she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze soft, contemplative, as though she was weighing a question she couldn't ask aloud. When our eyes finally locked, there was no pretense left. She didn't look away immediately this time. Instead, she held the gaze, steady and unwavering, until I felt the air between us tighten. My chest rose, but my breath caught halfway, and in that fragile silence, I swear the sound of my own heartbeat filled the room. Then she turned, almost abruptly, breaking the spell. She adjusted her hair, tucking it behind her ear, her expression smoothing into composure again. It was as if she had stepped back behind an invisible wall, guarding herself from what had almost surfaced. The conflict wasn't only hers. My thoughts ran wild, colliding between what I wanted and what I knew I shouldn't. She wasn't just anyone. She was my friend's mother, a line that should never blur. And yet, every instinct in me wanted to close the space between us, to take her hand, to say the things I wasn't supposed to say. She must have felt it too, because when I shifted slightly closer, she drew in a sharp breath. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, her hand lifted, a small, trembling movement, almost reaching toward my face. My pulse leapt. For a heartbeat, I thought she might actually touch me. But she stopped halfway, her fingers hovering in the air before she pulled them back, curling them against her chest. Her eyes flickered with something raw, hesitation, longing, fear, and then she looked away again, breaking the moment as quickly as it had formed. I sat frozen, torn between relief and disappointment. The nearness of what almost happened lingered like a ghost in the room. Every detail felt magnified, the faint sound of the clock ticking, the soft rustle of fabric as she smoothed her skirt, the unsteady rhythm of her breathing. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We shouldn't." The words trailed off, unfinished, hanging between us like a fragile thread. I nodded slowly, though it didn't feel like agreement. It felt like surrender, like stepping back from an edge I had already leaned too far over. Yet even as the space between us widened, even as she folded her arms as if to protect herself, I knew the truth. The hesitation wasn't the absence of feeling. It was the proof of it. The night had stretched as far as it could, and finally, there was no denying it was time to leave. The house had grown quiet, not the silence of comfort but the silence that comes when moments are running out. She walked me to the door, her steps unhurried, though I sensed the same reluctance that tugged at me. The hallway light cast her in a soft glow, highlighting the graceful lines of her face, the gentle strength in her posture. She wasn't smiling now, not the way she had earlier. Instead, her expression was thoughtful, almost solemn, as though she carried something unspoken she couldn't set down. I slipped on my shoes slowly, giving myself one last excuse to linger. My fingers fumbled with the laces, buying seconds I knew wouldn't change anything. She stood nearby, her arms folded loosely, watching me with a quiet intensity that said more than words ever could. When I finally straightened, our eyes met again. There it was, that same unguarded depth I'd glimpsed before, the part of her that felt too rare, too private to belong to anyone else. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out almost instinctively, and this time she didn't stop herself. Her palm found mine, warm and steady. She held it, not in a casual goodbye, but with a firmness that carried weight. The contact was simple, but it lingered, stretching into something more. My chest tightened, not with tension this time, but with a strange kind of calm. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely more than a breath. I wasn't sure what she was thanking me for, my help, my company, my silence, but I felt the sincerity in it. I wanted to answer, but the words tangled. Instead, I gave her hand the smallest squeeze, hoping she would feel everything I couldn't say out loud. Her smile returned then, faint, but real, and it was different from all the others. Not playful, not knowing, not guarded. This one carried a kind of peace, as though she had found comfort in the very thing she was trying to hide. We stood like that a moment longer, until finally she let go. The absence of her touch left a quiet ache, but also a strange reassurance, as though what had passed between us didn't need to be spoken to be real. I stepped outside, the cool air brushing against my face, grounding me back in the world beyond her doorway. Behind me, she lingered in the frame, her silhouette soft in the glow of the hallway light. "Good night," she said gently. I turned once more, meeting her eyes for the last time that evening. "Good night." And then the door closed softly, sealing the night. Yet even as I walked away, her presence stayed with me, the warmth of her hand, the echo of her smile, the unspoken promise we both understood. It wasn't a confession, nor an ending. It was something quieter, deeper, a bond woven out of glances, silences, and a secret we would both carry, held safely between us.